Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales of love, resilience, and the incredible power of human connection. In today's story, we'll follow the journey of a family who turned heartbreak into hope. Through loss, they found strength. Through struggle, they discovered purpose. And through love, they built a legacy that continues to touch countless lives. Join us as we explore their inspiring path, filled with lessons of compassion and the beauty of life's unexpected turns. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's heartfelt journey. Let's dive into the story. The rain poured mercilessly that night. A relentless downpour that washed the streets of Chicago and made the already biting cold almost unbearable. The city, usually alive with lights and noise, seemed subdued, as if even it had grown weary of the storm. I had just returned from a business trip, my mind preoccupied with the mundane worries of work deadlines and meetings. Life, I thought, had its routine, its predictability. But that night, fate had other plans. As my car crept along the near-empty streets, the headlights caught a figure huddled against the side of a crumbling building. She was barely noticeable, wrapped in what looked like a tattered coat, her frame so thin it seemed like the wind could carry her away. For a moment, I considered driving past her. What could I do? The city was full of stories like hers, people who had slipped through the cracks. But something made me stop. I stepped out into the rain, my umbrella doing little to shield me from the deluge. I called out, my voice uncertain. Do you need help? The woman looked up slowly, her eyes hollow yet filled with something unspoken, a mix of despair and defiance. In her hands, she clutched a plastic bag, cradling it like a lifeline. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. I'm fine. Just leave me. But I couldn't. There was something in the way she held onto that bag. Something fragile yet fiercely protected. That struck a chord within me. You can't stay out here, I insisted. It's too cold. Please, come with me, at least for tonight. She hesitated, her body visibly trembling from the cold. I extended my hand, and after a long moment, she took it. Her grip was weak, her hand icy. I helped her into the car, and as she sank into the passenger seat, the exhaustion in her posture was evident. My name is Adam, I said, trying to put her at ease as I turned up the heat. What's yours? Grace, she replied softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. The drive back to my home was quiet, save for the sound of the rain beating against the windows. Grace didn't say much, but every now and then, I caught her glancing at the plastic bag in her lap. It wasn't until we arrived and I led her into the warmth of the living room that I realized just how much the streets had taken from her. Her clothes were soaked, her face pale and lined with fatigue. Yet, there was a quiet dignity about her, as though she refused to let her circumstances define her. Sit here, I said, motioning to the couch. I'll get you a blanket and something warm to drink. She nodded, her gaze following me but still guarded. When I returned with a steaming mug of tea and a blanket, she accepted them with trembling hands. Thank you, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. As the rain continued to pound against the windows, Grace opened up, albeit cautiously. She told me about her daughter, Emily, a bright, spirited child who had loved drawing and laughing in the rain. Emily had passed away from a rare illness, and the loss had shattered Grace's world. With mounting medical bills and no support, she had lost her home, her job, and, ultimately, her will to fight. All she had left of Emily were the contents of that plastic bag, a worn photo, a few crayon drawings, and a small stuffed animal. Her words were halting, each one pulled from a well of pain I could scarcely imagine. Yet, as she spoke, her eyes shone with a fierce love for the daughter she had lost. She was my everything, Grace said, clutching the photo to her chest. I failed her. I couldn't save her. I didn't know what to say. What could anyone say to a grief so profound? But in that moment, I realized how small my own worries were in comparison. Grace's story wasn't just about loss, it was about love, pure, unrelenting, and all-encompassing. And it was that love, I suspected, that had kept her alive through everything. That night, as Grace slept in the guest room, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The image of her holding that bag, her lifeline to Emily, stayed with me. There was something about her resilience, her refusal to let go of her daughter's memory, that struck a chord deep within me. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of soft humming. Grace had woken early and was standing in the kitchen, her hands busily tidying up the counters. She looked different in the light of day, still frail. But there was a quiet strength about her that hadn't been as evident the night before. "You didn't have to do that," I said, startled to see her up and about. She turned, offering a faint smile. "I wanted to. You've already done so much for me." As we sat down for breakfast, Grace seemed more at ease. She even laughed, a soft, tentative sound, when I told her about my failed attempts at cooking. It was during that meal that she noticed the drawing on the refrigerator, one of my daughter Lily's latest creations. Her eyes softened as she looked at the colorful scribbles of a sunny day and stick figures holding hands. "You have a daughter?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, my chest tightening. "Lily. She's 8. Grace's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "She must be a wonderful girl," she said, her voice tinged with both genuine warmth and an underlying sadness. It wasn't long before Lily bounded into the room, her presence filling the space with light and energy. She greeted Grace with the unreserved enthusiasm only children possess. And Grace's expression softened even further as she interacted with her. There was a moment, brief but unmistakable, where Grace looked at Lily as though seeing a glimpse of Emily. As the morning wore on, I noticed Grace watching Lily closely, her gaze lingering on certain details, the way Lily's hands twitched slightly when she held a pencil, the way she occasionally paused to catch her breath after running up and down the hall. When Grace finally spoke, her voice was quiet but urgent. "Adam," she said, her eyes meeting mine, "there's something I need to tell you about Lily." And in that moment, as the storm outside gave way to an uneasy calm, I realized that Grace's arrival at my doorstep wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of something far greater than either of us could have anticipated. Grace's words hung in the air like the final note of a haunting melody. "There's something I need to tell you about Lily," she said, her voice low but steady. I could feel the gravity in her tone, a weight that made my stomach twist. "What is it?" I asked, my voice betraying a fear I wasn't ready to confront. She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Lily, who was busy drawing at the kitchen table. Then she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's her hands. The way they twitch sometimes. And her breathing, it's not quite right." "Is it?" I blinked, caught off guard. I hadn't given much thought to the little quirks Lily exhibited. She was a lively, happy child, always bouncing from one activity to another. But as Grace's words settled, I realized there had been moments, too few to dwell on but too many to ignore, when Lily seemed unusually tired or struggled to catch her breath. "She's fine," I said reflexively, trying to dismiss the unease creeping into my chest. "She's just an active kid." Grace shook her head gently. "Adam, I've seen these signs before. They were the first things I noticed with Emily." Her voice cracked slightly on her daughter's name. But she pushed on. "Please, don't ignore this. Get her checked. If I'd acted sooner with Emily, maybe." She trailed off, her words swallowed by the memory of what she couldn't change. Her plea was quiet, but it carried a force that broke through my defenses. That afternoon, I made an appointment with Lily's pediatrician. Grace offered to come along, and though I didn't say it aloud, I was grateful for her presence. She seemed to hold a knowledge that was as painful as it was necessary. The clinic was bright and cheerful, the walls decorated with animal murals and colorful charts designed to make children feel at ease. But my heart was anything but at ease as I watched Lily chatter happily with the nurse. Grace sat beside me in the waiting room. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't say a word. But her presence was steady, grounding. When the doctor came in, his demeanor was professional but warm. "What brings you in today?" he asked. His attention focused on Lily, who was swinging her legs on the exam table. I hesitated, unsure how to voice my concerns without sounding paranoid. Grace stepped in, her voice calm but direct. "She's been showing signs of muscle fatigue and shortness of breath," she said. "It could be nothing, but it's worth checking." The doctor nodded, his expression serious. "Let's run a few tests to be sure." What followed was a blur of activity, blood samples, physical exams, and questions that made my anxiety spike. Lily remained her cheerful self throughout, oblivious to the concern growing in the room. Grace sat quietly, her eyes shadowed with memories she wasn't sharing. When the tests were done, the doctor asked to speak with me privately. Grace stayed behind with Lily, keeping her entertained with stories about her daughter Emily. I followed the doctor into his office, my heart pounding like a drum. "Mr. Thompson," he began, his tone measured but grave. "The initial tests show some abnormalities. It's too early to confirm anything, but I'm concerned about Lily's symptoms. I'd like to refer her to a specialist for further evaluation." Abnormalities. The word echoed in my mind, heavy and sharp. "What kind of abnormalities?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "It could be a number of things," he said carefully. "But given her symptoms, we need to rule out any serious conditions. The specialist will be able to give us a clearer picture." I barely remembered walking back into the exam room. Grace's eyes met mine the moment I entered, and I saw that she already knew. She had seen this before, lived it. Lily ran up to me, holding a sticker the nurse had given her, completely unaware of the storm brewing around her. On the way home, Grace sat quietly in the passenger seat, her silence more comforting than any words could have been. Lily chattered in the back, her laughter slicing through the thick tension like sunlight through storm clouds. I clung to that sound, desperate to believe everything would be fine. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Grace and I sat in the living room. She cradled a mug of tea, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to push you into this. But if something's wrong, it's better to know now than later." I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. My mind was a mess of fear, anger, and denial. But beneath it all, I knew she was right. Grace had walked this path before, and she was trying to guide me through it, even if it reopened wounds she had fought to heal. "What was Emily like?" I asked after a long silence, needing to know more about the daughter Grace had loved and lost. A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She was bright, funny. She had this way of making everyone around her feel like they were the most important person in the world. Her voice softened. She loved drawing, especially rainbows. She'd say they were like promises that even after the rain, there's still beauty. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Lily loved drawing rainbows too. It felt like more than a coincidence, as though Emily's spirit was present in Grace's words, guiding us. As the rain began to fall softly outside, Grace looked out the window, her voice quiet but resolute. "Whatever happens, Adam, you won't go through this alone. We'll fight for Lily, together." Her words, filled with love and a strength born from unimaginable loss, gave me the courage I didn't know I had. That night, I sat by Lily's bedside, watching her sleep. In her peaceful face, I saw both the innocence of childhood and the fragility of life. And for the first time, I truly understood the depth of a parent's love, the kind that fights even when hope seems like a distant dream. The specialist's office was far from the bright, welcoming clinic we had visited earlier. The walls were a neutral beige, and the chairs, though comfortable, felt clinical. The gravity of the place mirrored the growing heaviness in my heart. Grace had insisted on coming with me, and I was thankful she had. Her presence, quiet but unwavering, was like a steadying hand on my shoulder. Lily sat beside me, her legs swinging as she clutched a small sketchpad. She was drawing another rainbow, her small hands moving with ease and enthusiasm that belied the concerns swirling around us. Grace sat across from us, watching Lily with a tenderness that spoke volumes. I saw her swallow hard, as though she were holding back the memories threatening to surface. When the nurse called us in, Lily bounced up, her energy a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere. Grace and I followed close behind, and as we entered the exam room, I noticed her hand brush against her pocket, where she kept a worn photo of her daughter, Emily. I realized then that Grace wasn't just here for Lily, she was reliving her own painful journey, one moment at a time. The specialist, Dr. Reynolds, was a tall man with a calm demeanor and kind eyes. He introduced himself warmly, crouching to Lily's level and engaging her in small talk about her drawing before turning to me. "Mr. Thompson," he began, "I've reviewed Lily's initial test results, and I'd like to run some more detailed diagnostics today." I nodded, my mouth too dry to respond. Grace placed a reassuring hand on my arm, her presence a silent anchor. Dr. Reynolds spoke to Lily with the gentle authority of someone used to working with children, explaining the tests in a way that made them seem more like an adventure than a medical necessity. Lily responded with her usual cheer, her trust in the adults around her both endearing and heartbreaking. As the tests began, Grace and I watched from behind a glass partition. I glanced at her, noticing how tightly she gripped her hands. Her lips moved slightly, and though I couldn't hear her words, I knew she was praying not just for Lily, but for all the children and parents who had been through this ordeal. Her strength amazed me, even as I saw the cracks in her composure. After what felt like hours, Dr. Reynolds returned, his expression serious but not unreadable. He gestured for us to follow him to his office, leaving Lily with a nurse who promised to teach her how to fold paper cranes. Grace and I sat across from him, and the gravity of the moment was palpable. "I'll get straight to the point," he began, his tone measured. "Lily shows early signs of a rare genetic disorder called mitochondrial myopathy. It affects the body's ability to produce energy at the cellular level, which explains her muscle fatigue and shortness of breath." The words hit me like a physical blow. I leaned back in the chair, struggling to process what he was saying. "How serious is it?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. Dr. Reynolds paused, his hands folded on the desk. "It's a progressive condition, but with early intervention, we can manage the symptoms and improve her quality of life. The key is acting quickly." Grace spoke then, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "What kind of treatment are we looking at?" He explained a complex regimen, specialized therapy, dietary adjustments, and possibly experimental treatments. It was overwhelming, but Grace absorbed every detail, her focus unshakable. She asked questions I hadn't even thought to consider, her experience with Emily giving her an insight I desperately needed. When the conversation turned to costs, I felt the blood drain from my face. The treatments, the therapies, everything was expensive, far beyond anything I had budgeted for. Dr. Reynolds assured us there were support programs, but the reality was stark. I glanced at Grace, whose face was a mask of calm, though I could see the pain in her eyes. She had been here before, I realized, faced with the impossible choice between hope and the harsh limitations of money. As we left the office, Lily ran up to me, holding a brightly colored paper crane. "Look, Daddy," she said, beaming. "The nurse said it's for good luck." I knelt down and hugged her, my heart heavy yet determined. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Grace knelt beside me, her hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. "Do you know what else is lucky?" Grace said softly, her voice full of warmth. Having a dad who loves you more than anything. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Grace and I sat in the living room, the silence broken only by the ticking of the clock. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice quiet. "For everything. For being here. I don't think I could do this alone." "You're not alone," Grace replied, her gaze steady. "You have Lily. And you have me. We'll figure this out. Adam. Together." Her words, spoken with conviction and love, gave me a glimmer of hope. Grace understood what I was facing in a way no one else could. And though the road ahead was daunting, I knew I wasn't walking it alone. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the soft sounds of Lily breathing in the next room, I thought about Grace's strength, her ability to keep moving forward despite her grief. And for the first time since the diagnosis, I allowed myself to believe that, like the paper crane Lily had made, there might still be a bit of luck left in the world. The days following Lily's diagnosis felt like a whirlwind, a blur of appointments, calls to insurance companies, and consultations with specialists. Every conversation seemed to pile on more weight: a new therapy to try, a different medication to consider, another round of tests to schedule. It was overwhelming. And despite my best efforts to keep a brave face for Lily, I felt like I was sinking under the pressure. Grace, however, remained a rock. She was there for every appointment, taking notes, asking questions, and offering quiet reassurances when my confidence faltered. Her experience with Emily had given her a unique strength, and I found myself relying on her in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was as if she had taken the pain of her own loss and transformed it into a fierce determination to help Lily. One afternoon, as we sat in the waiting room for yet another specialist, Grace handed me a cup of coffee. "You look like you need this," she said with a small smile. I took it gratefully, the warmth a welcome comfort against the chill that seemed to settle in my bones whenever I thought about Lily's future. "Thanks," I said, managing a weak smile in return. "I don't know how you do it." "Grace, stay so calm. I mean." Her smile faded, replaced by a quiet seriousness. "I'm not always calm," she admitted, her gaze distant. "There were days with Emily when I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the world was crashing down around me. But I learned something through all of it. The only way to fight for your child is to keep moving forward, one step at a time, even when it feels impossible." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I realized how much courage it took for her to relive her trauma by being here with us. She didn't have to stay, but she did because she cared about Lily, and maybe because helping us gave her some sense of purpose, a way to honor Emily's memory. The specialist we met that day, Dr. Ellis, was a woman in her early 40s with a calm, reassuring demeanor. She spoke directly to Lily, asking her questions about school, her favorite hobbies, and even her favorite color. Lily, ever the social butterfly, answered enthusiastically, showing off her latest drawing of a rainbow. Dr. Ellis nodded with genuine interest before turning to me and Grace. "Lily's condition is challenging," she said, her tone measured but kind. "But with the right interventions, we can slow its progression and help her maintain a good quality of life." She outlined a treatment plan that included physical therapy, dietary changes, and a combination of medications to support Lily's energy levels. There was even an experimental therapy being tested at a research hospital. Though the cost was staggering, insurance won't cover it, Dr. Ellis said, her expression sympathetic. "But it's showing promising results, especially in younger patients." My heart sank. The experimental therapy sounded like the best chance for Lily, but the price tag was beyond anything I could afford. Grace, sensing my hesitation, spoke up. "How soon would she need to start?" she asked. "As soon as possible," Dr. Ellis replied. "The earlier we intervene, the better her chances." The drive home was silent, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of us. Lily, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation. Hummed a tune from her favorite cartoon in the back seat. Grace glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Before speaking, "We'll find a way," she said firmly. "For Lily's sake. We have to." I wanted to believe her, but the numbers didn't add up. No matter how many times I ran the calculations in my head, I couldn't see a way to afford the treatment. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I felt the familiar pang of helplessness creeping in. But then I thought of Grace, of her resilience, her unwavering love for Emily, and her willingness to fight for Lily. If she could do it, so could I. The next morning, Grace and I sat down to discuss options. She suggested crowdfunding, reaching out to local charities, even selling some of my possessions to raise the money. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. "People will help if they know your story," she said, her eyes full of conviction. "Lily's worth fighting for." Over the next few days, we threw ourselves into the effort. Grace helped me set up an online fundraiser, and I was surprised by the outpouring of support from friends, family, and even strangers. The local news station picked up the story, airing a segment about Lily's condition and our struggle to afford her treatment. Donations began to trickle in, each one a small ray of hope. Through it all, Grace was there helping me draft thank you messages, organizing bake sales, and even convincing her church to hold a benefit concert. She was tireless, driven by the same love that had sustained her during Emily's illness. As the days turned into weeks, the fundraiser inched closer to its goal. But even as hope began to grow, so did the challenges. Lily's symptoms became more pronounced, her energy levels dropping, her breathing more labored. Watching her struggle was like a knife to my heart. But I refused to let her see my fear. One evening, as Grace and I sat in the kitchen tallying the latest donations, Lily wandered in, clutching her sketchpad. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice curious. "Just working on something to help you feel better," I said, ruffling her hair. She climbed onto my lap, her small arms wrapping around my neck. "I don't need anything," she said softly. "I have you and Aunt Grace. That's all I need." Her words, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to my eyes. I held her close, silently promising that no matter how hard the road ahead, I would do whatever it took to give her the life she deserved. Grace watched us with a small, bittersweet smile, and I knew she understood that promise better than anyone. For Lily, for Grace, and for the memory of Emily, I resolved to keep fighting. Together, we would face whatever came next, because love, I realized, was the most powerful force of all. The fundraising campaign became a beacon of hope, not just for Lily but for all of us. Grace threw herself into it with an intensity that bordered on relentless. She called everyone she knew, baked tray after tray of cookies for bake sales, and even reached out to a national non-profit organization for support. Watching her work was inspiring, though I sometimes worried that she was pushing herself too hard. One afternoon, we sat in the local community center, surrounded by tables of baked goods and handmade crafts. People from all over the town had come out to support Lily. It was heartwarming, but it also felt overwhelming. I watched as Grace greeted each person warmly, thanking them for their generosity and sharing snippets of Lily's story. Her energy seemed boundless, even as I noticed the shadow of exhaustion in her eyes. "Take a break," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than enough for one day." She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "There's no such thing as enough when it comes to Lily," she replied. "Besides, keeping busy helps." I understood what she meant. Grace wasn't just fighting for Lily, she was fighting for herself, for Emily, and for all the children who had battled illnesses like this. It was her way of channeling her grief into something meaningful, and I couldn't fault her for that. Lily, meanwhile, had become a little star in her own right. She loved the events, especially when they involved meeting new people. She sat at a table covered in colorful markers, drawing pictures for anyone who wanted one. Rainbows were her favorite, of course, and she insisted on adding a rainbow to every card. It's for good luck, she explained to a woman who had just donated. That evening, as we packed up the leftover goods, Grace handed me a tally sheet. "We've passed $30,000, she said, her voice filled with both relief and determination. "We're getting closer." I nodded, though the weight of how much more we needed was still heavy on my mind. "Closer isn't enough," I said, the frustration slipping into my voice despite my efforts to keep it in check. "What if we can't raise the full amount in time?" Grace set down the box she was holding and looked at me, her eyes steady. "We will," she said firmly, "because we don't have another option." Her certainty was both comforting and daunting. Grace had a way of making you believe in the impossible, even when the odds were stacked against you. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. More fundraisers, more calls, more emails. It was exhausting. But we pressed on. Every dollar that came in felt like a step closer to saving Lily. Still, the financial strain was undeniable. I sold my car, my guitar, and even some of the furniture in the house. Grace helped me sort through what I could afford to let go, her practical nature a steady guide through the chaos. One evening, as we sat at the dining room table reviewing the latest donations, Lily wandered in with her sketchpad. She climbed onto Grace's lap, her small hands gripping the edges of the book. "Aunt Grace," she said, her voice soft, "can I draw Emily?" Grace froze for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Of course. Sweetheart," she said, her voice steady. "I'd love that." Lily began to draw, her brow furrowed in concentration. I watched as Grace's fingers trembled slightly, resting on the edge of the table. When Lily finished, she held up the picture proudly. It was simple yet beautiful, a rainbow with two figures standing beneath it. One labeled Lily and the other Emily. Grace took the drawing carefully, her hands shaking as she held it. "It's perfect," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Lily." Later that night, I found Grace sitting alone in the living room, the drawing still in her hands. She didn't look up as I approached, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Emily would have loved Lily," she said. "They would have been best friends." I sat down beside her, unsure of what to say. Grace had opened her heart to us in a way I couldn't have imagined, and I was overwhelmed by the depth of her love for Lily, for me, and for the daughter she had lost. "Thank you," I said finally, "for everything." She looked at me then, her eyes shining. "You don't have to thank me, Adam. This is what family does. We fight for each other." Her words stayed with me long after she had gone to bed. Grace's love and sacrifice were a testament to the kind of person she was, a woman who had faced unimaginable loss and still found the strength to give everything she had for someone else. As I sat in the quiet house, listening to the sounds of Lily's soft breathing from her room, I realized that Grace had become the glue holding us all together. No matter how daunting the journey ahead seemed, I knew we would make it because we had Grace, and because we had each other. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of hope flicker in my chest. The days blurred into weeks, and the fundraiser steadily climbed closer to its goal. The exhaustion was constant, but so was the hope. Every small donation, every supportive message, every fundraiser held in Lily's name brought us closer to what felt like an impossible dream. Grace and I worked tirelessly, though her unrelenting energy put mine to shame. It was on one of those frantic mornings, just after we had returned from a meeting with a local business offering to sponsor part of the treatment, that the phone call came. Grace answered it, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. I watched her expression change, first confusion, then shock, and finally something that looked like cautious relief. When she hung up, she turned to me, her hand clutching the edge of the table. "It's Dr. Ellis," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She wants to meet us this afternoon. There's been an update." An update. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. I didn't dare let myself hope. But I couldn't stop the flicker of curiosity that ignited in my chest. Grace and I packed Lily into the car, and for the first time in weeks, the drive to the hospital felt lighter, almost surreal. Dr. Ellis greeted us in her office, her demeanor as composed as ever but with an edge of excitement in her voice. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," she began. "I wanted to speak with you about a new opportunity that might help Lily." She explained that a renowned research facility had recently expanded its trial for the experimental therapy Lily needed. "They've reviewed Lily's case," Dr. Ellis continued, "and they're willing to cover the costs of her participation if you agree to enroll her." For a moment, the room was silent. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the words. It sounded too good to be true, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of skepticism. "Why would they do that?" I asked, my voice tight with disbelief. "Because Lily's case is unique," Dr. Ellis replied. "Her age, her current condition, they make her an ideal candidate for the trial. The results could help shape the future of treatment for children like her." Beside me, Grace exhaled a shaky breath. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice cautious. "What risks are we talking about?" Dr. Ellis nodded, acknowledging the question. "As with any experimental therapy, there are risks, side effects, complications, and there's no guarantee of success. But the team leading the trial is one of the best in the country. If anyone can give Lily a fighting chance, it's them." I looked at Lily, who was happily sketching another rainbow on the notepad Grace had brought for her. She was blissfully unaware of the weight of the decision being made in this room. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and fears. But one thought rose above the chaos. This was a chance, one we couldn't afford to pass up. "We'll do it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Grace placed a hand on my arm, a silent show of support. Dr. Ellis nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and determination. The next week was a whirlwind of preparations. Forms to sign, tests to run, and a trip to the research facility in another state to coordinate. Grace was by my side for every step, her steady presence a balm to my frayed nerves. We explained the situation to Lily as simply as we could, framing the trial as an adventure. She embraced it with her usual enthusiasm, though I caught moments of hesitation in her eyes that told me she understood more than we gave her credit for. When the day came to leave for the facility, our small house felt oddly quiet as we packed the car. Lily clutched her favorite stuffed animal, a well-worn bunny named Tilly, and insisted on taking her art supplies. Grace helped her buckle into the back seat before turning to me. "Adam," she said softly, her gaze steady, "no matter what happens, you're giving Lily a chance. That's what matters." The drive to the research facility was long but uneventful. Grace sat in the passenger seat, reading over the trial documents for what felt like the 100th time. Lily napped in the back, her small body curled up like a child too young to carry the burdens she was facing. When we arrived, the facility was both intimidating and awe-inspiring. Modern glass walls gleamed in the sunlight, and the pristine interior buzzed with a quiet efficiency. We were greeted by a team of doctors who immediately began explaining the process in more detail. They were kind, but their words carried the weight of the unknown. The first night in the facility was hard. Lily was tired but curious, asking questions about the machines and tests. Grace and I took turns sitting by her bedside, offering reassurances we weren't sure we could deliver. I watched her fall asleep, her tiny hand still clutching Tilly, and felt the full weight of what we were asking of her. Grace sat beside me, her expression unreadable. "Do you think Emily would have had a chance if something like this had been available?" I asked softly. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but filled with a bittersweet resolve. "I don't know," she said. But if this can save Lily, that's enough for me. As the night deepened, the quiet hum of machines filled the room, a strange symphony of hope and uncertainty. I reached for Grace's hand, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were on the brink of a miracle. The first few days at the research facility were a test of endurance for Lily, for Grace, and for me. The doctors and nurses were compassionate and skilled, but the sheer volume of tests and procedures was overwhelming. Each day brought something new: blood work, scans, therapies. Lily endured it all with a resilience that left me in awe, though there were moments when even her boundless energy waned. Grace had taken on the role of both organizer and emotional support. She spoke with the medical staff, coordinated schedules, and ensured Lily's favorite snacks were always on hand. But her real strength lay in the way she comforted Lily during the difficult moments. Whether it was holding her hand during a blood draw or distracting her with stories about Emily, Grace seemed to know exactly what Lily needed. One particularly tough morning, as the doctors prepared Lily for a more invasive procedure, I saw her facade crack. Lily was crying softly, clutching Tilly to her chest, and Grace knelt beside her, stroking her hair. "It's okay to be scared," she whispered. "You're so brave, Lily. And it's okay to feel scared too." Lily nodded, her tears slowing, and I watched as Grace's calm presence worked its magic. But when the nurses took Lily into the procedure room, Grace's shoulders slumped. She turned to me, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to let fall. "I hate seeing her go through this," she admitted. "But I hate the thought of her not having a chance even more." I wanted to comfort her, to tell her she was doing everything right. But the words felt inadequate. Instead, I reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. She looked at me, and for a brief moment, we let our shared fears and hopes pass between us in silence. As the days turned into weeks, the trial began in earnest. The experimental therapy was administered in carefully monitored doses, and the team tracked every reaction in painstaking detail. At first, there was little change, neither improvement nor decline. It was agonizing. This waiting, this limbo. I spent hours by Lily's bedside, watching her sleep, willing her body to respond. Grace stayed just as close, though she had a way of channeling her anxiety into action. She would organize Lily's art supplies, fold and refold blankets, and comb through the trial paperwork until the edges were worn. One night, after Lily had finally drifted off, I found her in the small kitchenette reserved for families, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. "Grace," I said softly, sitting down across from her, "you don't have to carry this all on your own." She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "I know," she replied, "but I can't just sit and do nothing. It's too much like before." I knew she meant Emily, though she didn't say it. Her grief was ever present, but it didn't consume her, it fueled her. And in that moment, I realized just how much she was sacrificing to be here, to fight for Lily as though she were her own. The breakthrough came on an unremarkable Tuesday. Lily had been especially tired that morning, and the nurses decided to let her rest before administering the day's dose. Grace and I sat in the waiting area, paging through magazines we weren't really reading, when Dr. Peterson, the lead researcher, approached us. "We've been reviewing Lily's latest test results," she said, her tone measured but with an undercurrent of excitement. "We're seeing some early signs of improvement." My heart jumped. "What kind of improvement?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Her energy levels are stabilizing, and some of the markers we monitor are starting to normalize," Dr. Peterson explained. "It's still early, but it's a promising start." I looked at Grace, who was gripping the edge of her chair, her expression a mix of relief and cautious optimism. "It's working," she murmured, almost to herself. That evening, we shared the news with Lily, keeping it simple but celebratory. "You're doing so well," Grace told her, kissing her forehead. All this hard work is paying off. Lily beamed, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. Does that mean I can run outside soon? She asked, her eyes lighting up with hope. Not yet, sweetheart, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But soon. The days that followed were filled with tentative hope. Lily's appetite improved. Her energy returned in small but noticeable bursts. And the doctors began to smile more during their rounds. Grace and I clung to every positive sign, daring to believe that this might actually work. One afternoon, as Lily sat propped up in bed coloring another rainbow, Grace leaned over and whispered, "She's stronger than I ever imagined." "She gets that from you," I replied without hesitation. Grace looked at me, surprised, but didn't argue. Instead, she reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "We're not there yet," she said softly, "but I think we're going to make it." In that moment, I believed her. For the first time since this journey began, I let myself envision a future where Lily was healthy, where her laughter filled the house, and where Grace and I could finally rest. It wasn't a certainty, but it was a possibility, and that was enough to keep us going. The days after Dr. Peterson's news were like cautiously emerging from a long, dark tunnel. For the first time, it felt like hope wasn't just a distant concept, it was within reach. Lily's small victories became the highlights of our days, a bigger appetite, longer moments of playfulness, or a brighter smile. Each step forward felt monumental, a promise that the fight was worth it. Grace and I found ourselves reflecting more in those quiet moments when Lily slept or during our long walks around the facility grounds. The weight of what we'd been through together was undeniable, yet it had forged a bond between us that felt unbreakable. I caught myself wondering how I would have made it this far without her unwavering strength. One afternoon, Lily and Grace were sitting by the facility's playroom window, the golden light of the setting sun bathing them both in a warm glow. Lily was showing Grace her latest masterpiece, another vibrant rainbow with stick figure versions of all three of us standing beneath it. She'd labeled us in wobbly letters, Lily, Daddy and Aunt Grace. I leaned against the doorway, watching as Grace laughed at Lily's exaggerated explanation of the picture. "You've got to add a bunny, too," Grace teased. "Where's Tilly in all of this?" "Oh," Lily exclaimed, grabbing a pink marker to scribble a small rabbit near her feet. "There. Now it's perfect." It was such a simple moment, but something about it stuck with me. Grace wasn't just helping Lily, she was part of our family now, as much as she had been part of Emily's. I found myself wanting to say something, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I smiled to myself, letting the joy of that moment wash over me. The optimism, however, came with its share of challenges. The experimental therapy, while showing signs of success, was not without its toll. Some days, Lily was too tired to play or even eat, and the medical team warned us that these fluctuations were part of the process. The trial wasn't a straight road, it was full of twists and turns, setbacks, and uncertainties. One night, after Lily had a particularly rough day, I found Grace sitting outside on a bench in the facility's garden. The cool night air was crisp, and she had wrapped herself in a sweater, staring up at the stars. I approached quietly, sitting beside her. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. She shook her head, her expression pensive. "I keep thinking about Emily," she said softly, "about what it would have been like if she'd had this chance. If I'd fought harder, found a trial like this, maybe things would have been different." "Grace," I began, but she cut me off with a small, sad smile. "I know what you're going to say," she said, "that I did everything I could. And I know that. But watching Lily fight, seeing her respond to the treatment, it's a reminder of what could have been." I didn't know what to say. Grace had been so strong, so steadfast, and seeing her like this, vulnerable and weighed down by memories, made my chest ache. Tentatively, I reached for her hand, and to my relief, she didn't pull away. You're giving Lily what Emily never had, I said finally. And that's more than enough. You're giving her a chance. Her fingers tightened around mine. And for a moment, we sat in silence. The stars twinkling above us. It wasn't the kind of silence that needed filling, it was the kind that said everything words couldn't. As the weeks passed, Lily's progress became undeniable. She had more good days than bad. Her energy returning in bursts that reminded me of the way she used to run through the house, giggling at her own jokes. The doctors began to talk about the possibility of returning home, though they emphasized that her care would need to continue under close monitoring. Grace was the first to broach the subject of what came next. Adam, she said one evening as we cleaned up Lily's art supplies. Have you thought about what it'll be like when you're home again? What life will look like after all this? I paused, considering her question. I haven't. I admitted. It feels like we've been here forever. It's hard to think beyond this. She nodded, understanding. It'll be different. But it'll be good. Lily's stronger now. And so are you. And you? I asked, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Where do you see yourself after this? She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. I haven't thought about it either, she said softly. But I don't think I'm ready to leave yet. Not if you need me. It was a simple statement, but it carried a weight that left me momentarily speechless. Grace had become more than just a support system, she was a part of our lives. Of Lily's life. In a way I hadn't fully appreciated until now. I do need you, I said finally. We both do. Her smile was small but genuine, and I saw the faint shimmer of unshed tears in her eyes. Then I'll stay, she said. As though it were the easiest decision in the world. That night, as I watched Lily sleep, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for Grace. For the doctors. For the strangers who had donated to make this trial possible. We weren't at the end of the road yet. But for the first time in a long time, the path ahead didn't seem so daunting. We had hope. We had love. And we had each other. And for now, that was enough. As Lily's strength grew, so did our anticipation for the life waiting for us outside the facility. The idea of returning home felt surreal. Like stepping into a world that had moved on without us. But there was also a quiet hopefulness in those plans, a belief that this journey had changed us all in ways we were only beginning to understand. One crisp morning, Dr. Peterson met with us in her office. She had a folder of results. Her usual professional demeanor softened by a faint smile. Lily's progress continues to exceed our expectations, she said. Setting the folder down. She's responding beautifully to the treatment. With the right follow-up care. I'm confident she can thrive. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Grace reached for my hand. Her grip firm but trembling slightly. What does follow-up care look like? She asked. Always the pragmatist. Dr. Peterson explained the plan in detail, regular checkups, additional therapy sessions, and a gradual easing of restrictions as Lily's body continued to recover. It sounded manageable, though the responsibility was daunting. Grace, as always, took careful notes, asking questions I hadn't thought to voice. When we returned to Lily's room, she was sitting cross-legged on the bed, meticulously coloring a picture of a garden. She looked up as we entered, her face lighting up with a smile. Did the doctor say I'm all better yet? She asked. Her innocence both endearing and heartbreaking. You're getting there, sweetheart, I said, sitting beside her and brushing a stray curl from her forehead. And we'll be going home soon. Really? Her eyes widened with excitement. Can Tilly come too? Of course, Grace said, sitting on the other side of her. Tilly's part of the family. Lily beamed, returning to her coloring with renewed vigor. Watching her, I felt a pang of gratitude so deep it bordered on pain. She had endured so much, yet her spirit remained unbroken. It was humbling, to say the least. As the day of our departure drew closer, the staff at the facility began preparing us for the transition. They taught us how to administer some of Lily's medications, showed us exercises to help rebuild her strength, and reminded us to call at the first sign of trouble. The team was thorough, their care extending beyond medical expertise. They had grown to love Lily in the way anyone who met her seemed to, and their goodbyes were tinged with genuine affection. On our final night at the facility, Grace suggested we take a walk in the small garden behind the building. Lily was bundled in a thick coat and scarf, her cheeks flushed from the crisp air as she skipped ahead, pointing out every flower and leaf she found interesting. "It feels strange to leave," Grace admitted as we strolled behind her. "This place has been everything." "It's been hard," I replied, glancing at Lily, who was crouched by a patch of daisies. "But it's given us hope. I don't think I could have done this without you." She looked at me, her eyes soft but searching. "You would have found a way, Adam. You're stronger than you think." Her words, so simple and sincere, struck something deep within me. Grace had been my anchor throughout this storm, a steady force that refused to let me sink. I wanted to tell her how much she meant to me, but Lily called out before I could find the words. "Look," she exclaimed, holding up a single white flower she had carefully plucked. "It's perfect." Grace knelt beside her, examining the bloom. "It is," she said, smiling. "What are you going to do with it?" Lily grinned. "I'm going to press it in my book so I can keep it forever." The next morning was a flurry of activity as we packed up Lily's belongings and said our goodbyes. The nurses and doctors gathered to see us off, many of them kneeling to give Lily one last hug or high five. She soaked up the attention, her laughter filling the lobby as she promised to send them pictures of her adventures at home. As we stepped outside, the cool breeze carried the faint scent of autumn. Lily held tightly to Tilly in one hand and the small book with her pressed flower in the other. Grace stood beside me, her face radiant with a mixture of relief and anticipation. On the drive home, Lily chattered non-stop about everything she wanted to do. She talked about painting a giant rainbow on her bedroom wall, baking cookies, and playing in the yard. Her enthusiasm was infectious. And even Grace, who often tempered excitement with practicality, was swept up in it. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Lily's eyes widened in wonder. "It's even better than I remember," she said, climbing out of the car and running to the front door. Grace and I followed, both of us pausing to take in the sight of the house that had once felt so distant from our reality. Inside, the house was quiet but welcoming. It smelled faintly of cinnamon, thanks to the candle Grace had lit during one of her trips home to prepare for our return. Lily immediately ran to her room, leaving us standing in the living room. "It feels different," I said after a moment. "It is," Grace replied, her gaze steady. "But different doesn't mean bad." I nodded, knowing she was right. This house, this life, it had changed. But so had we. And as I listened to Lily's laughter from the other room, I realized that different could also mean better. Returning home felt like stepping into a life we'd only dreamed of during those long, uncertain months. The house, once filled with worry and silence, was now alive with the sound of Lily's laughter and her excited footsteps as she rediscovered every corner. Grace and I moved carefully through this new normal, cautious not to let the memories of the past overshadow the fragile joy blooming around us. Lily wasted no time diving into her list of activities. By the second day, her room was already covered with new rainbow drawings. And Tilly, her faithful stuffed bunny, had been ceremoniously placed on a shelf of honor. She insisted on baking cookies, and despite the chaos of flour-covered counters and burnt edges, the kitchen was filled with the kind of warmth we hadn't felt in a long time. Grace, ever the organized one, ensured Lily's post-treatment care ran like clockwork. She kept a binder with Lily's medications, therapy schedules, and follow-up appointments, her meticulousness both impressive and comforting. I often found myself leaning on her more than I intended, but she never seemed to mind. She thrived in the role, though I could tell it came with its own quiet weight. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, I caught her staring out the window, her hands resting on the edge of the sink. The soft glow of the porch light illuminated her face, and for a moment, she looked lost in thought. "Grace," I said, breaking the silence. "Everything okay?" She turned to me, her expression soft but distant. "I was just thinking about Emily," she admitted, "and how much she would have loved this, seeing Lily happy, seeing you so, at peace." I nodded, my chest tightening at the mention of my late wife. "She would have loved you, Grace," I said quietly, "for everything you've done for Lily, for me." Grace smiled, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "I hope so," she said softly. "I just want to honor her in the way she deserves." "You've done more than that," I replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've given Lily and me a chance to heal." In the days that followed, Grace became even more involved in our routines, not just out of necessity but out of genuine care. She helped Lily with her art projects, read bedtime stories, and even started teaching her how to bake without burning the cookies. Their bond grew deeper with each passing day, and I often found myself watching them with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. One sunny afternoon, Lily suggested we plant a garden together. "A rainbow garden," she declared, her eyes shining with excitement. "We can plant flowers in all my favorite colors." Grace and I exchanged a glance, smiling at the simplicity of her request. "A rainbow garden it is," Grace said, grabbing a notepad to jot down the supplies we'd need. The following weekend, we spent hours in the backyard, digging, planting, and laughing as Lily directed the project like a tiny foreman. She insisted on planting white flowers in the center for Tilly and Emily, she explained, and we honored her request without hesitation. By the end of the day, our hands were dirty, our backs sore, but the sight of Lily beaming with pride made every moment worthwhile. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set over our newly planted garden, Lily climbed onto Grace's lap, her small arms wrapping around her neck. "I love you, Aunt Grace," she said simply, her voice muffled against Grace's shoulder. Grace froze for a moment, clearly caught off guard, before hugging her tightly. "I love you too, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I felt my throat tighten as I watched the exchange, overwhelmed by the depth of the bond they had formed. Grace wasn't just an aunt to Lily, she was a lifeline, a source of strength and love that had carried us through the darkest times. As the days turned into weeks, the garden flourished, becoming a symbol of everything we had overcome. Neighbors who had followed our journey stopped by to admire it, offering words of encouragement and bringing small gifts for Lily. It was a reminder that we weren't alone, that our story had touched others in ways we hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, as Grace and I sat on the porch watching Lily play in the yard, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "What do you think about starting a foundation?" she asked. "Something to help families like ours, families who need hope." The idea caught me off guard, but as I thought about it, I realized how much sense it made. "A foundation for kids like Lily?" I asked. "Exactly," she said, her enthusiasm growing. "We could raise funds for treatment, help families navigate trials, and maybe even support research." I nodded slowly, the idea taking root in my mind. "It's ambitious," I said, "but if anyone can make it happen, it's you." Grace laughed, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I can't do it alone," she said, nudging my shoulder. "You're in this too, remember?" As I looked at her, I realized how far we had come, not just as individuals, but as a family. The journey had been anything but easy, but it had brought us here, to this moment of possibility and hope. And as I watched Lily run through the yard, her laughter filling the air, I knew we were ready to begin this next chapter together. The idea of starting a foundation quickly transformed from a passing thought to a shared mission. Grace's determination fueled the momentum, and before I knew it, We were deep into planning what would become a cornerstone of our new lives. The Lily Foundation, as we decided to call it, would be dedicated to supporting families navigating the overwhelming world of childhood illnesses. Just as we had. Grace threw herself into the project with her characteristic precision. She researched tirelessly, reaching out to medical professionals, families, and other organizations to understand how we could make the most meaningful impact. Watching her work was like seeing a piece of her come alive, a side of Grace that thrived on purpose and connection. Lily, of course, wanted to help. She sat at the kitchen table with her markers and construction paper, designing super official logos for the foundation. One featured a giant rainbow with the words "Helping Kids Like Me" scrawled across it in bright letters. Another showed a group of smiling stick figures holding hands under a sun. "That one's my favorite," Grace said, holding up the second drawing. "It's perfect." Lily beamed, clearly proud of her contribution. "Can we use it for the website?" she asked. "Absolutely," I replied, ruffling her hair. "This foundation is all about you, sweetheart." As word spread about the foundation, we received an outpouring of support from friends, neighbors, and even strangers. Donations began to trickle in, and offers of assistance came from people who had heard our story. It was humbling to realize how many lives had been touched by Lily's journey and how eager people were to help. One evening, Grace and I sat at the dining table, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and notes. Lily had gone to bed hours earlier, and the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Grace was poring over a draft of the foundation's mission statement, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Providing hope and resources for families of critically ill children," she read aloud. "What do you think?" I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "It's good," I said. "But what about something more personal? Something that reflects Lily's spirit?" Grace looked thoughtful, tapping her pen against the paper. "How about empowering families to find hope, strength, and joy in the face of adversity?" "That's perfect," I said, smiling. "It's exactly what Lily has taught us." Grace's eyes softened, and for a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the past few months settling between us. "You know," she said finally, "I never imagined I'd be doing something like this. But it feels right." "It is right," I agreed. "Because of you, Grace. You've been the heart of this from the start." Her cheeks flushed, and she gave a small laugh. "Don't make me cry," she said, brushing a hand across her eyes. "We still have a mountain of work to do." We worked late into the night, fine-tuning details and drafting plans. By the time we finally called it a night, I felt a deep sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. The foundation wasn't just a project, it was a way to honor everything we had been through and to give back to others who might be facing similar struggles. The launch event for the Lily Foundation was a modest affair, held in the community center down the street. We decorated the space with Lily's drawings, and Grace put together a slideshow of photos and moments from our journey. When the day arrived, the room was filled with a mix of familiar faces and new supporters. Lily, dressed in a bright yellow dress, took her role as the star of the foundation seriously. She greeted guests with her usual enthusiasm, clutching Tilly in one hand and a stack of brochures in the other. Watching her, I couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. Her laughter echoed through the room, a testament to the power of hope and resilience. Grace gave a speech during the event, her voice steady and full of conviction. She spoke about the challenges we had faced, the support we had received, and the importance of paying that kindness forward. "This foundation is about more than just providing resources," she said. "It's about showing families that they're not alone, that even in the darkest times, there's a light to be found." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. I saw tears in the eyes of some of the guests, and my own vision blurred as I clapped. Grace had captured the essence of what we were trying to achieve, and her words resonated with everyone in the room. As the event wound down, Lily approached Grace and me with a big smile. "Did we do it?" she asked. "We did it," I said, lifting her into my arms. "And it's all because of you." The night ended with a sense of hope that lingered long after the guests had gone. The Lily Foundation was no longer just an idea, it was a reality. A living tribute to the strength and love that had carried us through our hardest days. And as we stood together in the quiet of our home, I knew we had found a new purpose, a way to turn our pain into something beautiful. The days following the launch of the Lily Foundation were filled with a flurry of activity. Grace and I worked tirelessly to establish the organization's foundation, building partnerships with hospitals, developing programs for families in need, and managing an ever-growing list of donations. It was exhausting, but it was also fulfilling in a way I'd never imagined. Every late night and early morning felt like a step toward something greater, something meaningful. Lily, in her usual exuberant way, was an unofficial ambassador for the foundation. She proudly told anyone who would listen about her foundation and the children it would help. Her joy was infectious, and seeing her so full of life reminded us why we had started this journey in the first place. One bright morning, Lily bounded into the kitchen holding a handful of her pressed flowers, the ones she had collected during her treatment and recovery. "Can we use these for something special?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Grace leaned over, inspecting the colorful blooms. "What do you have in mind?" "Lily, maybe we can give them to the kids who come to the foundation," Lily suggested, "to make them smile." Grace and I exchanged a look, marveling at her thoughtfulness. "That's a wonderful idea," Grace said. "We could make cards with them or create something they can keep." By the following week, we had turned Lily's idea into a project. Using her pressed flowers, we created small cards with encouraging messages to include in care packages for families supported by the foundation. Each card featured Lily's bright artwork alongside her favorite phrases, like "You're stronger than you know" and "Rainbows come after storms." Lily insisted on helping with every step, from gluing flowers to writing messages. "Do you think they'll like it?" she asked one afternoon, her hands sticky with glue. "They'll love it," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Because it comes from you." The response to the cards was immediate and overwhelming. Parents sent heartfelt notes thanking us for the kindness, and some even shared pictures of their children smiling while holding Lily's creations. Grace pinned the messages to a bulletin board in the foundation's office, a visual reminder of the lives we were touching. As the foundation grew, so did our circle of support. Grace's relentless outreach efforts brought together a network of passionate individuals, doctors, volunteers, and even other families who wanted to give back. Among them was a woman named Angela, whose son had recently undergone a similar treatment to Lily's. Angela's energy and empathy were boundless, and she quickly became an integral part of the foundation's team. "I just want to help other families the way people helped me," Angela said during one of our meetings. "This foundation is giving me a purpose I didn't know I needed." Her words resonated deeply with Grace and me. The foundation wasn't just about providing support, it was about creating a community, a space where families could find strength in one another. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what Emily would say if she were here?" I nodded, the familiar ache in my chest softening as I thought of my late wife. "I think she'd be proud," I said. "Not just of the foundation, but of Lily and of you." Grace looked down, a small smile playing on her lips. "I hope so," she said quietly. "Sometimes I feel like she's still guiding us. You know? Like she's the reason we've come this far." "I believe that," I said, reaching for her hand. "She brought us together, Grace, and she'd want us to keep going." The connection between us had grown stronger over the months, forged by shared grief and a mutual love for Lily. Grace had become more than Lily's aunt, she was my partner in every sense of the word. And I couldn't imagine this journey without her. As the seasons changed, The foundation flourished. And so did our lives. The garden we had planted with Lily became a sanctuary for all of us. A place where we could reflect on the past while looking toward the future. The white flowers Lily had insisted on planting took center stage. Their delicate petals a symbol of hope and renewal. One day, as we tended to the garden, Lily paused to examine a cluster of newly bloomed flowers. "They're so pretty," she said, gently touching a petal. "Do you think Emily likes them?" Grace knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "I think she loves them," she said softly. "And I think she loves you for planting them." Lily beamed, her smile lighting up the entire garden. Watching her, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for her resilience, for Grace's unwavering support, and for the chance to turn our pain into something beautiful. That night, as we sat together in the living room, Grace leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you think we're ready for whatever comes next?" she asked. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer. "I think we are," I said. "Because we have each other and we have Lily. That's all we need." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Our journey was far from over. But we had found our footing, our purpose, and our hope. And with that, anything felt possible. The garden had become more than a simple collection of flowers. It was our refuge, our reminder of resilience and growth, and a reflection of the life we were cultivating together. Each bloom held a story, a moment of struggle transformed into beauty. And every time we sat there, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the vibrant petals of our rainbow garden, Lily darted from flower to flower, her giggles filling the air. Grace and I sat on a nearby bench, watching her with the kind of quiet joy that came from seeing her thrive after so much uncertainty. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Grace asked, her voice soft but laced with awe. "Honestly," I replied, my eyes following Lily's every move. "No. There were nights I couldn't see past the next morning. But now," I trailed off, gesturing toward Lily, who was crouched by the white flowers she had planted for Emily. "Now, I can't imagine anything else." Grace smiled, her gaze turning wistful. "It's funny how life works," she said. "How something so painful can lead to something so beautiful." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had shaped us in ways we couldn't have anticipated. It had brought us closer, deepened our love for Lily, and given us a shared purpose that extended beyond ourselves. The foundation had become a cornerstone of that purpose. Families began reaching out in increasing numbers, seeking support, guidance, and a sense of hope. Grace, with her natural ability to connect with others, became the heart of the organization, while I focused on logistics and fundraising efforts. Together, we built something that felt like a second chance, not just for us, but for everyone who needed it. One family in particular stood out. The Walkers arrived at the foundation with a little boy named Ben, whose bright smile masked the weight of his illness. His parents, Laura and David, were exhausted but determined, their love for Ben evident in every interaction. "Thank you for seeing us," Laura said during their first meeting. "We've been feeling so lost, like we're drowning and don't know which way to swim." Grace reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on Laura's. "You're not alone anymore," she said, her voice steady and kind. "We'll walk this path with you, every step of the way." Over the weeks that followed, Ben became a regular at the foundation, his laughter echoing through the halls as he played with Lily and other children. His parents found solace in the support groups Grace had organized, sharing their struggles and victories with others who understood. Watching their transformation reminded me of our own journey, the fear, the hope, and finally, the healing. Lily, ever the social butterfly, took Ben under her wing. She taught him how to press flowers and helped him create his own garden-themed cards for other kids at the foundation. One day, as they sat side by side in the art room, Lily turned to Ben with a serious expression. "You know what helps," she said, holding up a rainbow she had just drawn. "Believing you're a superhero. That's what my dad and Aunt Grace always told me." Ben grinned, his eyes sparkling. "Can I be a superhero too?" "Of course," Lily declared. "Everyone here is a superhero." Hearing those words brought tears to my eyes. Lily, who had once been so fragile, was now a beacon of strength and optimism for others. She had turned her own struggles into a source of light. And I couldn't have been prouder. One evening, after the foundation had closed for the day, Grace and I lingered in the office, going over plans for an upcoming fundraiser. The event, a charity gala, was our biggest endeavor yet. And we were determined to make it a success. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Grace asked, flipping through a stack of invitations. "We've come this far," I said, placing a hand over hers. "If anyone can pull this off, it's you." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You always say that." "Because it's true," I replied. "You've built something incredible here, Grace. I'm just lucky to be along for the ride." Her expression softened. And for a moment, we sat in comfortable silence. The weight of the day fell away, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. The foundation wasn't just a project, it was a testament to everything we had overcome and everything we hoped to achieve. As we locked up and stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapped around us, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the garden. Lily's laughter drifted toward us from the house, where she was playing with Tilly and her newest creation, a superhero cape made from an old bedsheet. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Grace said, her voice tinged with awe. "She is," I agreed, my heart full. "And so are you." Grace turned to me, her eyes shining in the dim light. "We're a good team, aren't we?" "The best," I said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. And as we walked toward the house, the sound of Lily's joy guiding us, I knew that we had found not just healing but hope, a hope that would carry us forward, one step at a time. The charity gala for the Lily Foundation was the culmination of months of planning and anticipation. Grace had poured her heart and soul into every detail, from the invitations to the venue, ensuring the event reflected not just the foundation's mission but also the joy and hope that Lily embodied. The night was more than a fundraiser, it was a celebration of resilience and the community we had built together. The venue itself was a vision, an elegant hall adorned with soft lighting and floral arrangements inspired by Lily's rainbow garden. Each table was decorated with centerpieces made from her pressed flowers, paired with small cards featuring messages of encouragement. It was both beautiful and deeply personal, a testament to how far we'd come. Lily was thrilled by the idea of dressing up for the event. She spent the afternoon twirling in her light blue dress, declaring herself a garden fairy. Grace had even found a small pair of sparkling wings to complete her look. "Do you think everyone will like it?" Lily asked, spinning in front of the mirror. "They'll love it," Grace assured her, adjusting one of the wings. "You're the star of the night." As we arrived at the venue, Lily's eyes widened with awe. The hall buzzed with excitement as guests arrived, many of them families who had been touched by the foundation. Grace's meticulous planning shone through in every detail, and I couldn't help but admire how seamlessly she had brought everything together. Shortly after the guests were seated, the program began. Grace stepped up to the podium, her calm demeanor masking the nerves I knew she felt. She opened with a heartfelt welcome, thanking everyone for their support and sharing the foundation's vision for the future. "Our mission is simple," she said, her voice steady and warm, "to ensure that no family facing a critical illness feels alone. Tonight, we're not just raising funds, we're raising hope." Her words were met with resounding applause. As I watched her speak, I was struck again by her strength and grace. She wasn't just a leader, she was a beacon of hope for everyone in the room, including me. When it was my turn to speak, I focused on the personal journey that had led us here. I shared the story of Lily's illness and recovery, emphasizing the role Grace and the community had played in helping us through. This foundation exists because of the love and support we received, I said. It's our way of paying that forward, to honor those who helped us and to ensure that others find the hope they need. As I spoke, my eyes found Grace in the crowd, and I felt a swell of gratitude. She gave me a small, encouraging nod, and I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. The highlight of the evening was Lily's surprise appearance. With her wings sparkling under the lights, she walked onto the stage holding a microphone almost as big as her. The audience erupted in cheers, and she beamed, clearly in her element. "Hi, everyone," she said, her voice cheerful and confident. "Thank you for coming to my foundation. I just want to say, you're all superheroes." The room melted. Guests laughed and applauded, and I saw more than a few people wiping away tears. Lily's innocence and joy were infectious. And in that moment, she encapsulated everything the foundation stood for. After Lily's brief but unforgettable speech, the night transitioned into a mix of dinner, live music, and an auction. The energy in the room was electric as guests bid on items ranging from handmade artwork to weekend getaways. One of the most popular items was a set of framed pressed flower collages made by Lily, which sparked a bidding war that left her grinning from ear to ear. As the evening wound down, Grace and I took a moment to step outside and catch our breath. The cool night air was a welcome reprieve from the buzz of the hall, and we stood side by side, taking it all in. "You did it," I said, breaking the silence. "You made this night unforgettable." Grace turned to me, her expression a mix of exhaustion and pride. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you or Lily." I shook my head, smiling. "This was all you, Grace. Your vision. Your heart. You've built something incredible." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of the evening seemed to lift. "It's not just about tonight," she said. "It's about what comes next. The families we'll help. The lives we'll change. That's what matters." "You're right," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As we walked back inside, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude not just for Grace and Lily, but for the journey that had brought us here. The pain, the uncertainty, the loss, it had all led to this moment, this purpose. And as I looked around the room, filled with laughter, hope, and a shared commitment to making a difference, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. The success of the gala was only the beginning of what would become a ripple effect of hope and impact. The funds raised that night exceeded even our most optimistic projections, allowing the Lily Foundation to expand its reach and resources. The outpouring of support left us both humbled and energized. Grace, as always, threw herself into the work with unwavering determination. In the weeks that followed, we began to see the tangible effects of the Foundation's mission. Letters and messages poured in from families who had benefited from the support we provided, parents thanking us for covering medical bills, for connecting them with specialists, or simply for being there when they felt overwhelmed and alone. Each message was a reminder of why we had started this journey and why we couldn't stop now. One family stood out in particular, the Johnsons. Their daughter, MIA, had been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition, and they were struggling to navigate the maze of treatments and financial burdens. Grace took a special interest in their case, spending hours on the phone with doctors and insurance companies to ensure MIA received the care she needed. One afternoon, the Johnsons visited the Foundation's office to meet with Grace in person. MIA, a shy, wide-eyed 6-year-old, clung to her mother's hand as they walked in. She was holding a small, well-worn stuffed bunny, her constant companion through countless hospital stays. Grace knelt to Mia's level, her voice gentle and warm. "Hi, MIA. I'm Grace. That's a lovely bunny you have there. What's her name?" "Bun Bun," MIA whispered, her voice barely audible. "Well, Bun Bun looks like a great friend. Grace said with a smile. I think you're both very brave. Mia's lips curved into a hesitant smile, and I watched as Grace effortlessly put the family at ease. It was moments like this that made me realize just how special she was. She had a way of making people feel seen, understood, and valued, a gift that made her an anchor for so many. As the Johnsons left that day, Mia turned back and waved, her smile now bright and unguarded. Grace waved back, her own smile lingering long after they were gone. Later that evening, as we sat in the quiet of our living room, I brought up the Johnsons. You're incredible. You know that, I said, watching Grace sip her tea. She raised an eyebrow, her expression amused. What brought that on? The way you connected with Mia, I said. And with her parents. You make people feel like they're not alone, like they matter. It's a rare gift. Grace set her cup down, her eyes softening. I just do what I can, she said quietly, because I know what it feels like to be lost in all of this. If I can make it even a little easier for someone else, then it's worth it. Her humility only made me admire her more. I reached over and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. You're changing lives, Grace. Don't ever doubt that. She smiled. And for a moment, the weight of the day seemed to lift. Meanwhile, Lily continued to thrive, her boundless energy and enthusiasm spreading joy wherever she went. She had taken to calling herself the Foundation's junior CEO, a title she wore with pride. She spent her afternoons helping organize events, crafting cards for other kids, and, of course, tending to the garden. One sunny afternoon, as Lily and I worked side by side planting new flowers, she looked up at me with a serious expression. Do you think Emily is proud of us, Dad? I paused, her question catching me off guard. I think she's very proud of us, sweetheart, I said, kneeling beside her. She's probably smiling down at you right now, seeing how kind and strong you've become. Lily considered this, her hands resting on the soil. I think she sent Aunt Grace to us, she said thoughtfully, to help us be a family again. Tears pricked at my eyes as I nodded. I think you're right, Lily. She always knew what we needed, even when we didn't. Lily grinned and went back to her flowers, humming a tune as she worked. Watching her, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Lily and Grace, but for the unexpected turns life had taken to bring us here. The foundation continued to grow, its impact reaching farther than we could have imagined. Families began forming connections with one another, creating a network of support that extended beyond the foundation's walls. Grace often said it felt like we were planting seeds not just in the garden, but in people's hearts and watching them grow into something beautiful. One evening, as Grace and I sat on the porch reflecting on the foundation's progress, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about what's next? She asked. What do you mean? I said. For us, she replied. For the foundation. For Lily. For everything. I smiled, taking her hand in mine. I think we'll keep doing what we're doing, helping people, building a life we're proud of. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Grace leaned her head against my shoulder, her voice soft. Together sounds pretty perfect. As the stars began to twinkle above us, I realized that our journey, though shaped by loss, had led to a life filled with love, purpose, and connection. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt not just possible, but full of promise. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the garden bloomed in all its glory, a symbol of life's resilience and the beauty that can grow even from pain. Grace, Lily, and I stood together by the lake, watching the reflections of the white lilies that floated serenely on the water. This garden, much like our journey, had flourished against the odds. What started as a story of loss had become one of love, hope, and transformation. Lily's laughter echoed through the air, a reminder of how far we'd come. Grace took my hand, her eyes reflecting the same gratitude I felt. The Lily Foundation had become more than an organization, it was a beacon of hope. A testament to the power of community and compassion. And through it, Emily's spirit lived on, guiding us as we continued to make a difference. As we stood there, I realized that life doesn't always go as planned, but it has a way of leading us to exactly where we need to be. And in that moment, I knew we were home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring videos. See you in the next chapter.